The Judicial Services Commission has written back to the MK party confirming that it plans to go ahead with its interviews scheduled for next week without the presence of its parliamentary leader, Dr. John Hlophe. Now, last Friday, the Western Cape High Court issued an interim interdict which prevents Dr. Hlophe from participating in next week's JSC gathering that is yet to hear arguments around his membership on the body. Now, on Monday, the official opposition wrote to Chief Justice Mandisa Maya in her capacity as the Commission chairperson to postpone the sitting until their application for leave to appeal is heard. But on the same evening, the JSC held an urgent meeting and has decided to forge ahead with the judicial interviews since Hlophe's membership has not yet been set aside by the courts. This also means that the composition of the body is deemed to be lawful and meeting the quorum according to the response given. Meanwhile, the MK party has threatened to stage a protest against the JSC if it goes ahead with the sittings on Monday and also interdict the gathering from going ahead. I'm now joined in studio by Ziyanda Ngcobo, who's going to be giving us more on this conversation. Ziyanda, very good afternoon to you. Now, last week, when the Western Cape took out its interdict, the MK party put out a statement, and within that statement, they cited Section 178 of the Constitution, where 3 of the 6 National Assembly members sitting on the JSC need to come from opposition parties. Does that carry a weighty argument in this regard?
Well, let's start off with what was actually being dealt with by the Western Cape High Court last Friday. So the matter is split into 2. The first is to hear whether or not the court should allow Dr. John Hlophe to form part of the JSC sittings for next week and in April next year. And Part B then deals with the merits of the matter. And the main question that is being asked there is whether or not Parliament was rational for allowing an impeached judge like Dr. John Hlophe to actually form part of not only the National Assembly, but also the Judicial Services Commission. So last week, the Western Cape High Court only made a pronouncement on Hlophe's participation, but not his designation to the JSC, which effectively means his membership on the JSC still remains until that Part B has been dealt with. And so insofar as the composition is concerned, that judgment, which is pretty much an interlocutory application because it's not the full judgment, is basically saying that until we actually get to the merits of the case, for now, Dr. Hlophe, do not participate. And they base this on a concept called balance of convenience, which is basically looking at who would be most inconvenienced on the basis of their judgment. So, I mean, the cost implications, for an example, of postponing a sitting on the JSC were considered, as well as the legitimacy of the decisions of the JSC, if ultimately in Part B, they do uphold the DA's argument that it was irrational to have him be a part of this body. So, to go to your question about composition, the court has said and has actually given guidance to the JSC insofar as whether or not the absence of Dr. Hlophe will have a material effect on what the Constitution allows. And this is what the JSC spokesperson told me earlier.
The court has spoken about the absence, the consequence of the absence of Dr. Hlophe at a sitting of the JSC, and has provided guidance about what should happen. And the guidance it has provided is that he can miss the sitting of the JSC, and that would not affect its composition. But I think the judgment also goes on to say that the National Assembly can choose to solve that problem. It's not a problem for us to solve as a JSC.
So that's Sesi Baloy. So you'll recall that late last night, the JSC held an urgent meeting to discuss this. They're saying we're going ahead with it according to, of course, they don't want to go against a court judgment, but also, there were questions around the fact that because the MK party has now officially filed for application for leave to appeal, ordinarily that would suspend you know, the operationalization of a particular order. But they're saying here, that's the JSC, that because it's an interim order, they're going to be able to continue. Now, even when we're talking about this question you asked, Katlego, about composition, various law experts, constitutional law experts, have also spoken about the fact that the ability of there not to be a quorum, you have to literally, it has to be impossible for someone to actually attend a sitting. So it's happened before that someone has fallen ill, or the Constitution makes provision. In fact, 2 Supreme Court of Appeal judgments have said if someone, you know, were to get into a car accident, does it mean now that the JSC sitting can't go ahead? So it literally means it has to be impossible. And in this case with Dr. Hlophe, it is impossible for him to attend next week's sittings, and therefore the issue of composition and quorum, so to speak, are dealt with. And we spoke earlier to Pierre De Vos, who's also a constitutional law expert.
The previous cases dealing with the presence of a premier, in the case of disciplining Dr. Hlophe, in fact, in that case, Dr. Hlophe took exactly the opposite position of what MK is taking now and said it didn't matter. Obviously, in those cases, if the people who are designated or who should be there can be there and they're not there, clearly the JSC is not properly constituted. In this case, there is a court interdict, rightly or wrongly granted, which now says the one of the 3 MPs from opposition parties is prohibited from participating in the JSC, which seems to make it then impossible for that person to be there. So unless Parliament can designate somebody else in the meantime, I don't see how the matter, you know, how the matter could be postponed for or could be postponed merely because the court has said that has given an order.
So, Ziyanda, before I let you go, I mean, the sitting is going ahead on Monday. The MK party, though, has threatened to protest outside the proceedings. What impact do you think that may have?
So 2 things, actually. So the MK party had said yesterday that if the sitting is not postponed, they will try and interdict the matter. But they're also calling upon South Africans and MK members to be on standby, so to speak. It won't have an impact, and I think this is the point that the JSC has made, that they're trying to insulate the processes, legal processes, from politics, and this, in essence, that many experts have said, this is a political issue that is now spilling over into the Judicial Services Commission.
All right, Ziyanda Ngcobo, thank you so much for that clarity and the update with regards to this.